Hey. Hello, everyone. My name is Councilmember Alondra Cano. I'm here chairing the Intergovernmental Relations Committee today is Thursday, March 3rd, and I am here with Councilmembers Jacob Fry, Abdi Warsame, and Council President Bart Johnson. And I believe this is quorum, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes. Wonderful. Okay, so we will begin our regularly scheduled Intergovernmental Relations Committee. And we have a couple of items here on our agenda today. We have one consent item, which is the conflict of interest review for lobbyist firms. We have a couple of items under the discussion, one of them being the amendment to the City of Minneapolis fiscal year federal policies and agenda, the updates to the City of Minneapolis's 2016 policy positions and legislative agenda. We have another item, updates to the City of Minneapolis's 2016 policy positions public safety section. We have item number 5, federal housing policy related to the sale of non-performing loans by federal agencies. Item number 6, amending federal aviation policy positions to include opposition to the privatization of air traffic control. And item number 7, which is federal, state, local, and legislative updates. So with that, I would like to move the consent item forward for approval. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we will move on to our discussion item. So item number 2 being the amendment to the City of Minneapolis fiscal year 2015 federal policies and agenda. Do we have anyone that wants to speak on that today? Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon, Councilmember Chair Cano and Council members. Melissa Lesh with the IGR department. We have a few, we would probably just frame them as technical updates to both the state legislative agenda and our volume of policy positions. So the first suggested change we have is in the local government finance section on page 3 to modify the following statement and insert a few new words. So the new statement would read, diversification, that the City of Minneapolis supports diversification of revenue sources and investment options, that's new, available to local governments, including, and that's new, cities. Just expanding that statement a little bit. And then moving on to the capital bonding section, also on page 3, to delete the dollar amount that's referenced there for the request to the state and the legislature for the restoration of the Pioneers and Soldiers Cemetery fence. Increase that request from $609,000 to $1.029 million. That $1.029 million, that had been our number, plus or minus, for quite a long period of time. Just at the time of submission for the documents, we thought that the bid was going to come in lower. So that 609 is what we had to submit. But all along, we were pretty confident that it was more around that $1 million mark. So not a huge surprise, and not a huge surprise to the state either. Moving on, the next change that we would suggest is in the transportation and transit system funding section on page 4 to insert the following language. The city supports full state funding for the I-35W and Lake Street Transit Access Project, which will leverage significant federal resources, ensure the timely completion of other related projects, and increase access to jobs and educational opportunities through improved and expanded transit service to currently underserved communities in Minneapolis. I would note that our current agenda does have a statement that references the 35W and Lake Transit Access Project. We just wanted to enhance the existing statement and move it into a more prominent place on the list. This is a project that we will be working alongside our partners at Hennepin County to be advocating for this legislative session, as well as some of our terrific partners in the business community and the Phillips Partnership, and we will be working together to try to advance this through the bonding process this session. And then there's a note that any related formatting and technical changes, we would ask your indulgence to make those changes going forward. So the statements that I just made would be added to our policy positions, and for your reference again, that's kind of the city's library of positions we can reference at any time. They may or may not be moving in any particular legislative session. So then we also suggest below that adding the language regarding the 35W and Lake Street Transit Access Project to the city's 2016 legislative agenda, that this will be something that we will be actively working on and that will hopefully be moving at the Capitol this year. So we suggest putting that in both documents. So with that, Madam Chair, I would stand for questions on the transportation and bonding section, and then I can move on to the updates to the public safety section.
Did you say to the public safety section?
Yeah, well, I can move on to presenting those. I just wanted to pause and see if there are any questions about the transportation and bonding updates.
Sure. Do we have any questions here? Councilmember Jacob Fry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Lesh, does the transportation bill include any of those the parking fees that we were discussing that would potentially go towards greening and other issues as well?
Thank you, Councilmember Fry and Madam Chair. Currently, where the transportation bill sits is that the conference committee that was discussing the large comprehensive transportation bill at the end of the 2015 legislative session is currently sitting open. That the small transportation bill that was passed at the end of the 2015 session was really what we call the lights on bill. It was what the department needed just to continue to function for the next year. The large discussion really is still on the table. And the enabling language that would allow both the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul and their downtown areas to collect, through the process of the city council, to collect a fee that would go towards greening and public realm improvements is sitting in the Senate side of that conference committee. So we've been working with our partners in the business community to find some language for them that would be acceptable for them, to give them some comfort about what these improvements might look like and what their role in administering that process would look like, as well as our colleagues in the city of St. Paul. So we'll continue to work on that and keep you updated. Thank you.
So I just want to do a quick check with the clerk. So it seems like we're covering issues in item number 3. Should I go ahead and call the vote for number 2 for the gun violence research?
I believe that Mr. Ranieri, they have some presentation material for that item, because since it's a discussion item, you may want to check in with him.
All righty. So I just want to be clear here. We jumped into number 3, although I thought we were going to talk about number 2. So number 3 was covering the issues of the transportation amendments or updates to the 2016 policy positions. So do we want to go ahead and take a vote on that now, or go back to number 2?
Since these are discussion items, if you'd like, you could take a voice vote on each item.
Okay, thank you. Can we please go ahead and take a voice vote on item number 3, which is what Ms. Lesh just walked us through. So all those in approval of updating the City of Minneapolis' 2016 policy positions to include the items listed below, please say aye. Aye. And that item passes, and we will now go up to number 2 then, the gun violence section.
Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Ranieri.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, just to clarify, do you want us to talk about the updates to the public safety section of the legislative agenda or the federal gun violence amendments to the federal agenda?
So I want us to go up to number 2, which is the amendment to the City of Minneapolis' fiscal year 2015 federal policies, which have to deal with the violence prevention and the passage of the resolution on gun violence research as stated on the agenda. So just if we could just go item by item, the way that they're listed.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Gene Ranieri. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the city. This item is part of the federal agenda. It was brought to us by Councilmember Gordon. You have 2 items in front of you, a resolution and an RCA, which would amend the federal agenda to include an item that basically recommends the Congress to authorize and fund firearm safety and gun violence prevention research. Currently, since 1996, there has been a limitation in federal law that does not allow the Center for Disease Control to do any sort of, the terms as advocacy and discussion of gun violence research, or gun violence, or to advocate for any sort of gun control. That's been interpreted by CDC to mean they can't do any research on gun violence. There have been attempts to try and change that. It has not, it has failed. It is opposed by, you would expect, National Rifle Association. And most recently, after every major, unfortunately, a mass shooting, there are attempts to take this off or to allow for some sort of response to do some research. And to this date, nothing has occurred. A city council member, I think in the city of New York City, has started sending nationally a resolution, which I think Councilmember Gordon could speak to, that is asking Congress, start a groundswell, grassroots, asking Congress to at least have funding available to do some of this kind of research. And now this has had an effect also to not limit only federal research, but also lots of private research, because some of that has matching funds from the feds. So there has been the so-called Dickey Amendment in 1996 was the instrument that was offered, the amendment to an appropriations bill by a congressman from Arkansas. He has twice, in I think 2012 and more recently, said, I made a mistake and we should repeal it. And there have been lots of editorials and lots of discussions on this. Bills have been introduced, but nothing has yet happened. And Councilmember Gordon, want to add anything? Or?
Thank you, Mr. Ranieri and Madam Chair. I don't have a lot to add except that this is something that's part of a national coalition effort, and there's city councils throughout the country that are doing it. And there's actually a couple of bills that are coming forward that will clarify that the CDC should be able to do research on gun violence prevention. And we've, in the city of Minneapolis here, been a leader in looking at gun violence and youth violence as a public health issue as well as a public safety issue. And I think we should absolutely want our Center for Disease Control and the other federal agencies that research violence and health issues to be able to research this issue as well. So what this resolution would do would be putting us on record supporting those bills and supporting allowing the Center for Disease Control to do their work to look at anything that is a public health risk and do research on it. Happy to answer any questions.
Just have a quick comment. Thank you for bringing this forward, Councilmember Cam Gordon. And I just wanted to say, I see the word Hispanic throughout this document. I would like to change that to Latino. If that's okay with you?
Sure.
Did you have a question? No? Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds good. So that was item number 2, the amendment to the City of Minneapolis' fiscal year 2015 federal policies agenda relating to firearm safety and violence prevention, promoting the research, and a passage of resolution supporting congressional funding for gun violence research. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And we shall move on to number 4. Updates to the City of Minneapolis' 2016 policy positions, public safety section.
Madam Chair, thank you again, and council members. So what we have put together for you today is just kind of a language refresh of the city's public safety legislative agenda. And I believe the plan going forward is to bring some additional items that will require additional conversation and research that are going to be more substantive in nature at a future cycle. But the hope was to first provide a language refresh and then take a deeper dive into some of those more substantive topics at a subsequent, those more substantial topics at a subsequent cycle. So what you have in front of you today, I can just quickly walk through these language updates. Change in title from public safety to the public safety and criminal justice reform section. Reform is the title. Eliminate the current introductory paragraph and insert public safety is a core responsibility of local government. The City of Minneapolis supports policies that ensure a safe and livable community. The City of Minneapolis also supports initiatives that strengthen community policing and trust among local government, law enforcement officers, and the communities they protect and serve. A new section entitled Criminal Justice Reform. An item that exists in another part of our agenda right now that will be moved into this new criminal justice reform section. Restore the right to vote for those who have completed their period of incarceration for a criminal conviction. Again, the city already had a statement supporting that, but this is just moving it and highlighting it in this section. We've moved our statement supporting the driver diversion program into this section, and then also expanding the funding for restorative justice programs, also currently in our agenda, just moved into this section to highlight the issue. Moving on to resources and funding for public safety. The statement that we have about support for ex-offender reentry programs, we've added a note to include mental health and chemical dependency treatment for the services that are important for those who are reentering our community post-release. Moving on to the top of the next page, at least the next page of the RCA, I should say, we have deleted the statement initiatives to address livability crimes, including continued and increased state funding for restorative justice programs, because it was reframed in that earlier statement. And then moving on, public safety policies and coordination efforts, just some language duplication that was in the statement around protecting the human rights of immigrant populations and establishing a culture of mutual trust between law enforcement and immigrant populations was just a duplication of that language. So we referenced these communities to foster greater community public safety. And then our statement regarding our support for driver's licenses. Again, this was in another section, and we've just in municipal governance, so we've just moved it here. So the city supports legislation that modifies the Minnesota driver's license procedures to allow information regarding the applicant to be gathered from an identification card issued by a government other than the United States. Moving on to strengthening the criminal code, we've deleted the statement that the city supports legislation creating tougher penalties for offenders convicted of tagging, which includes the suspending of driver's licenses for up to 1 year, and also support for a statewide age limit on the purchase of spray paint. A lot of these are just not moving anymore at the Capitol. They're not being discussed, and that they have a tendency to have a disproportionate effect on young people and people of color. So that's why you see some of these being deleted. A deletion of strengthening laws regarding the health, safety, and well-being of vulnerable adults, including indecent exposure and neglect laws. Again, this was a really hot topic. Maybe about 4 years ago, Hennepin County had some legislation that they were specifically advancing on the well-being of vulnerable adults. They were successful in that initiative, so we haven't really seen much action on it the last few years, so suggested deleting that. And then moving on, just a point of clarification, the city has both in the policy positions and in our legislative agenda for 2016, with the help of the city attorney's office and the police department, a statement regarding the regulation of motor carriers of passengers and prohibiting adult entertainment and the consumption, and we did not have of alcohol. It just said, or consumption by a minor. We thought we would be specific by what we don't want them to be consuming. Moving on then to the traffic and driving safety section, we deleted the reference there to the driver diversion program that we support because we moved it into that earlier section. And then towards the bottom, we have some updates to the gun violence section where just some updating of some language to make it a little more modern and a little more accurate for how we actually talk about gun violence prevention and responsible gun ownership and initiatives to prevent gun violence and efforts to support responsible gun ownership. And we have a statement in there requiring universal criminal background checks on all gun sales. That's something that's already in the city's legislative agenda. We just wanted to make sure that it was very clear also in our policy positions. And then finally, at the end of the document, in our very short opposition section, opposition to decriminalizing misdemeanor and livability related offenses. Again, this was something that was really a hot topic at the legislature maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, an effort to take offenses that were that are currently misdemeanors and move them to the state's payable list, the petty misdemeanor list. That effort really has died out. It was really moving for about a year or two. We haven't seen any movement on that and don't anticipate any in the future, so we've suggested deleting that as well. So, Madam Chair and committee members, I think that is the totality of the changes that we have for the public safety, and if you approve it, criminal justice reform section.
Wonderful. Do you have any questions from the committee members? Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in looking through the proposed changes, the one that did give me some concern was taking out this decriminalization thing. So that was an initiative that was proposed by whom at the time? Do you remember?
Yes, and actually the city attorney's office was really helpful in working on some of these issues. This was probably in 2009, maybe 2010, somewhere in there. It initially came from, and I might need help on the language, but the State Judicial Council. Of the
Something-
judges, I'm looking at the city attorney for a phone a friend, but the judges, the Judicial Council, I think it came from them. Am I remembering that right?
But it's
But it
died
was-
a natural death?
It
Is
did.
that-
It did.
okay.
It had a healthy debate at the Capitol. It was taking a lot of different misdemeanors that are sprinkled throughout statute, and some of those the state has the authority to enforce a petty misdemeanor and charge just a ticket for instead of the more criminal level of a misdemeanor. And at the time, we did strongly oppose that at the time, that these were livability crimes, and they were, some of them, yes, could be moved to the payables list. Some of them were just out of date and things of that nature. But some of them, we really did oppose moving them to the petty misdemeanor payables list because they were livability crimes. That was really a budget move at the time when we were facing deficits. It was a way for the state to frankly charge more on the payables list and collect more fees. And now that we're not really in that situation anymore, we haven't really heard talk of it for the last probably 5 years.
I just, I will tell you, my constituents watch this stuff very, very closely. And, I've had to explain in detail some of the proposals that some of them view as being soft on crime. So I'm just paying attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from committee members? It looks like not. So I want to go ahead and move item number 4 forward for approval, which is updates to the City of Minneapolis' 2016 policy positions, public safety section. All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And that item carries. Now we're down to number 5, federal housing policy related to sale of non-performing loans by federal agencies. And we have somebody here who's going to walk us through this report.
Madam Chair, I guess I'm going to start and then hand it off to Ms. Brennan. This issue is a lingering effect from the foreclosure mortgage crisis of 2008, 2009. Many of the federal agencies, particularly the Federal Housing Finance Administration, which really governs Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, has a large inventory of non-performing or delinquent mortgages and is trying to find a way to dispose of those and maybe get some more money back into the federal treasury. What they have come up with is rather massive sales. Well, they'll have sales of maybe thousands of mortgages, bundle them together, and offer them at what they call the principal balance remaining, and that's totals in the last year and a half, about $4 billion, and puts them for auction or puts them out for bid. And large firms from across the country are bidding on these at a discount and then owning these mortgages. And people were concerned that, there's been no opportunity for community groups, nonprofits, or others to be involved. And the federal agency, Federal Housing and Finance Administration, has come out with some guidelines, said that we are going to make some offerings to community activities. There would be a pool of mortgages available in locations across the country where there's a concentration of these mortgages, and we'll have bids from nonprofits. So $4 billion have gone out. $23 million of that $4 billion is for nonprofits so far. So it's a very small number. And most of it is concentrated in the South. And what's ironic is the winning nonprofit is a community development organization in New Jersey. It's doing work in Florida. Another group of city council members and mayors across the country is concerned about this and requesting more information about what's the impact or what's happening in our city and their cities across the country, so at least we can assess what we should be doing, or should we work closely with our nonprofits who are qualified to do this to try and avoid what's occurring, is because many of these folks are buying these mortgages and then either using them for rental housing, or in some states, particularly in Ohio and Michigan, doing them contract for deed, and then folks can't make those payments. They're taking the house and doing it again and again. So there's a concern about this. We were action requesting is to ask the department, the U.S. Treasury Department and Federal Housing Finance Administration for information about what is the level of the amount of loans that are so-called non-performing in our city, and then we can meet and hopefully come up with some strategies with some of our nonprofits and our own city department.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'd just like to add that we don't have a sense of the problem here locally, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're asking for authorization to basically make the request of the Federal Housing Finance Administration, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, to give us the data on their delinquent mortgages that they have in Minneapolis. And then to the extent that there are delinquent mortgages, to ask them to hold off on any sale and to allow us to convene our local nonprofits, our CDFIs, community development financial institutions, of which we have many in Minneapolis, to give us an opportunity to see if we could structure some sort of proposal to them to get these mortgages into the hands of responsible investors or responsible nonprofits. The ultimate goal would be then to the extent possible, actually prevent the foreclosure. So do some foreclosure remediation. And to the extent that that's not possible, then to make sure that that sale is made, the post-foreclosure sale is made again to an owner-occupant or a responsible investor or landlord. What we've seen, what we're hearing nationally is that where these delinquent mortgages are going in bulk sale to sort of, outside investors, we're seeing that they're linked to increased rates of foreclosure and owner to rental conversions, which is particularly problematic in parts of our city that have lower property values, and something that we've seen in a lot of our neighborhoods, particularly in the north side, year after year increases in single family conversions from owner to rental. So this may not be a substantial problem in Minneapolis, or this could be a canary in the coal mine type of situation, but we're just asking for authorization to request some data from the federal agencies and ask them to hold off on any sale at this time.
So Councilmember Johnson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just heard about this at the Northside Home Fund meeting for the first time. So it's not the actual property, it's the mortgage that's being sold. So,
Right.
So then if you sell a mortgage, then can you change the terms of the mortgage?
Well,
Or
in
what?
this case, I don't know that you can actually change the terms, but you can certainly choose not to work with the borrowers.
Like a workout if somebody,
Right,
if
exactly.
someone is behind.
So you could
Okay.
accelerate the foreclosure, and as opposed to, Fannie and Freddie, they do have workout programs
Sure.
with their homeowners, and
Uh-huh.
so the idea is to try to put those into the hands of a lender or an investor or an owner who would be willing to pursue those strategies. Or again, if they're not, what we're finding is that then the sale of these mortgages are going out. Owners are potential, or the investors are doing just that, accelerating or pursuing the foreclosure, and then a subsequent sale, and those sales are then going to investors who are converting from owner to rental.
Well, Madam Chair, I'd like to say I really appreciate staff's work on this, because it's in this whole mortgage, merry-go-round that we've been on for almost 10 years now. I mean, it's just like, what's the next iteration going to be of problems? And so I think to have the information at hand as to what our risk is, I think is really important. So thank you for working on this.
Well, thank you. It looks like we have no further questions. So item number 5, let's go ahead and move this up for approval. The federal housing policy related to sale of non-performing loans, and approving a resolution to request that federal agencies hold off on further sales to investors. Thank you to our staff for that. So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And that motion carries, moves forward. And we're now in item number 6, which is amending the federal aviation policy positions to include opposition to the privatization of air traffic control. And I'm sure we have a staff report on this, so go ahead, Mr. Ranieri.
Madam Chair, I'm substituting for Ms. Olson because she is on her way back by plane from a conference out west. What this is the Federal Aviation Administration's reauthorization bill is being debated now in Congress. It passed out of committee in the House of Representatives. What it includes is a 6-year reauthorization of the FAA. It's about a $69 billion appropriation. But there are some policy sections of that bill. One of the policies being championed by the chairman of that committee is to convert the air traffic control function of our aviation system to a private nonprofit corporation. Have a board of directors, I think, of 11 members, some folks from the industry, from I think Congress and others, and I think also from the traffic control folks themselves. That nonprofit corporation would then run the air system in our country from the control towers. There is concern about that. We are concerned in discussions that it may make it more difficult to have that dialogue we now have with the FAA and the control tower about airport issues. It could be less responsive. It could be less communication and engagement that is now occurring. And we are recommending that we be opposed to that section of the Federal Aviation Reauthorization Bill. In addition to that, we are also concerned that we are also aware that the airline industry itself is not totally unanimously in support of this. Delta Airlines is opposing this. And they point to all the things about efficiency, saving money, saving of time, things like that. And they point to Canada and say, we don't see that occurring. So we're in the Senate. We're not sure what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen in this session, but this is a topic that is in major discussion in Congress. And I think Councilmember Quincy is here, and if he have any, I know he can add to this because he's been deeply involved in this issue also.
Welcome, Councilmember John Quincy.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wasn't prepared or planning on speaking on this particular issue, but I think as Mr. Ranieri outlined, it's a air traffic control privatization issue. It's part of the reauthorization bill as one of the amendments. So we're not sure where the reauthorization bill is going to go this session, but the city's position is what is in front of you today, is to take a formal position similar to what I wrote as the chair of the airport working group, was to solicit the city's position. So this kind of codifies where we're at with that. We're very concerned on it, not from just a labor point of view, but from an absolutely pure air traffic safety point of view, operating in the national airspace. So happy to answer any direct questions, but just happy to have your support for this federal policy amendment.
Sounds good. Thank you. I don't see any questions from committee members, so let's go ahead and move this forward. This being the amendment to the federal aviation policy positions to include opposition to the privatization of air traffic control. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And that motion carries. And now we're down to number 7. Thank you for being here, which is the federal, state, local legislative updates.
Yeah. Okay. Madam Chair, as everyone and members of the committee, session starts on Tuesday, the 8th of March. As you're aware, last week there was a forecast for revenue. It is down $300 million than prior, so there's less money to spend or to appropriate. So far, some of the committees have met this week. There's been some discussion, some data practice issues. There's been some tax issues. And then I think next week we'll see some committees, but the week after probably be in full gear. But it ends, the first round or the first deadline is March 30th. So we only have about 3 weeks for policy bills to get out of committee and then move to the next phase. So it's going to be a very quick session, and there probably is going to be a lot of bills that don't make it through the session. And anything you want to add, Melissa?
Madam Chair, I would just add that I think the majority of our time and focus is really going to be spent on kind of the 3 big budget bills that were left outstanding from last year, which is the transportation bill, As I mentioned earlier, there was a small lights on bill to close out the 2015 session, but a comprehensive package, of course, did not pass. The tax bill that was not closed out either in 2015, and then the bonding bill. We could adjourn this session without another transportation bill because of the bill that was passed last year, and we could close out without a tax bill. Neither of those are technically needed to keep the government running. The question is, are they technically needed in an election year? That's a whole different conversation. But in order to keep the government functioning, it's not necessary to pass those two bills. But can you pass those two bills? Do you need those two bills to help pass a bonding bill and really get a deal done at the end of the day? That will really be what the legislature is wrestling with, we think, for this particular legislative session. So as Mr. Ranieri said, it will be fast, it will be furious, and we think that our time will really be spent on those much larger bills, and that 2017 will be the time that we'll really be able to devote to a lot of the policy initiatives that our terrific policy liaison team has helped us with, and our city departments. That will probably be where we'll be able to get some action on those, because just the time is just going to be eaten up by the larger, more comprehensive conversations.
Do we have any questions from committee members? Oh, one question over here, Councilmember Barb Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if we don't have a tax bill, then what happens to local government aid?
It would stay status quo, but Mr. Ranieri.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson, which remain the same, the formula would continue to run. It is
Okay.
an appropriation, so.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Cool. Without further questions, then it looks like we can go ahead and receive and file this verbal report. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And without further items before us, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.